So let's start off with a small issue for the beginning of a Saturday, and that is bringing the world out of poverty. Is development aid working? And I want to start off with what we call the swimming pool moment. And what is the swimming pool moment? Well, I used to be a competitive swimmer, as was the junior foreign affairs minister in Pakistan. So when I was in Islamabad working for the United Nations, we used to train together. And we got to the end of the pool one morning, and I looked at him and I said, "Why are you involved in politics?" And he looked at me and he said, "I'm involved in politics for the same reason as everybody else. I'm here to protect my family's land interest." And in there lies a problem. In there lies a big failure in the West. Because we look at our governments, Labor or Liberal, and we assume they're trying to do the best thing by the people. Because if they don't, they get tossed out at the next election. And we transpose that assumption onto other governments and deliver foreign aid through other governments because we assume that they're wanting to do the best thing for the people as well. When I spoke to a very senior government minister in Philippines when I was working there, he said to me, "We're involved in politics to protect our family's financial interest." Interesting. In most post-tribal and most post-feudal societies, those who are in charge of the country are the former feudal overlords or the former tribal overlords who are there to protect their family's financial interest or their family's land interest or a combination of the both. So I ask you this really tough question. Is it in their family's financial interest or their family's land interest to economically, socially or educationally empower the poor? And the answer is no. So would they? No. Yet we keep on crying for doubling foreign aid through the same mechanism that we've been providing it in the last 50 years. Billions of dollars into countries like Democratic Republic of Congo, but they're still poor. The truth is, we give foreign aid government to government to be able to win the support of that foreign government in ASEAN, APAC, the General Assembly, what have you. If we put true conditionality on the foreign aid that we give to foreign governments, truly make them give money to the poor, will they support us in our diplomatic objectives? And the answer is no, because it works against their government's interest, even if it's for their people's interest. So is there a different way? If really the last 50 years has established the public sector delivery mechanisms for aid and development haven't worked, is there another way? Because we know we're not going to achieve the Millennium Development Goals by 2015. I want us to start thinking about moving from development aid to development investment. That's the post-Millennium Development Goals world. Whatever happens after 2015, we need to demand a return on our aid spending, be that return social or financial or a combination of both. We need to be invested in the success of a program, not invested in the process of a program. So I want you to think about this. United Nations Development Program spends $1 billion a year trying to bring the world out of poverty, yet the world still has poverty. BHP Billiton, the world's largest miner, spends $200 million per year on community investment. Wait a second, one company, BHP Billiton, spends 1/5 of the amount of the United Nations Development Program. It only takes 5 companies the size of BHP, 5, to spend the same amount as the international organisation we rely upon to bring the world out of poverty. Yet we think it's not the role of the private sector. Members of the Committee for Melbourne, the organisation that I'm the CEO of, 160 companies based here in Melbourne, spend a combined $1.5 billion a year in community investment and community development programs. Think about that. The Committee for Melbourne spends more than the United Nations Development Program on bringing the world out of poverty, and largely doing that with a target of 1% of pre-tax profit. The top 100 companies in the world spend $15 billion in community investment and community development programs. That's more than the entire United Nations system, including all peacekeeping and political affairs. Surely, with this amount of money going around, there's something better we can do for bringing the world out of poverty. And we can do it around what I call the great convergence point in history. The great convergence point in history that we're beginning to enter now. And that is this: a greater awareness that the public sector delivery mechanisms for aid and development have been ineffective or, at their very best, inefficient in delivering aid. More of us are starting to get aware of that. Secondly, we have a growing professionalisation in corporate social responsibility and community investment programs. I say it's growing. The seed is beginning. The more enlightened companies are moving forward. For example, BHP Billiton do an anti-malaria campaign around Mosul, Mozambique, and they've reduced adult malaria infections from 74% of the population to 17%. It's warm, fluffy, good kumbaya singing, corporate social responsibility stuff. But critically, what it also does is it reduces absenteeism in the workforce because of the increased health. That improves the productivity of their asset and an aluminium smelter, and that feeds into the bottom line. To which the left wing turn around and say, see, they're only doing it for profit. To which I answer, I don't care. It's still reducing adult malaria infection from 74% of the population to 17%. In fact, BHP Billiton is invested in the success of the program precisely because it feeds into the bottom line. It's in their interest to keep the anti-malaria program going. It's in their interest to reduce malaria infections and improve the health of the population. Compare that with what I said earlier about governments. Was it in the interest of a post-feudal or post-tribal government to succeed in bringing their poor out of poverty? And the answer was no, because it works against their family's financial or land interest. But it is in the interest of the evil empire to bring the world out of poverty because it makes their workforce more effective. In the same town in Mosul, they also do a lot of primary school education programs. And why do they do that? The life expectancy of their asset, the aluminium smelter, is 50 years. By educating people in primary school, they know their second generation workforce will not only be healthier because of the anti-malaria campaign, but smarter because of the education program, and that feeds into the bottom line. Two very interesting convergence points, but then there's a third that's coming in today that I'm really excited about. Generation Y demands a social outcome as part of their work. It's a new way of looking at work. It's a new way of looking at what you demand from your employer. And these days, employees more often fire the employer and look for another employer than the employer in firing the employee. So what do we do with this convergence point? A growing realisation of the lack of effectiveness over the last half a century of aid and development, a growing professionalisation in corporate social responsibility, and a growing demand from Generation Y to have a social outcome as part of their work. What we've got to do is rehabilitate in the public consciousness the mind of the role of the private sector. And that's the post-millennium development goals world. And that's why it's an exciting time to actually be here. Because where in the world is the best understanding of that convergence point between growing dissatisfaction of public sector delivery mechanisms, growing professionalisation of corporate social responsibility, and Generation Y? The answer is here in Melbourne. Why? Think about this. We are the philanthropic, corporate social responsibility and humanitarian hub of Australia, although we never think of it that way. We love to say in Melbourne we're number one for sport, we're number one for food, we're definitely number one for coffee, but I haven't had mine this morning yet. And we're number one for romance, the Premier tells us as well. I've discovered that. I won't tell you the secret of that one. But we've never actually thought about this. The biggest philanthropic funds, the Smorgans, the Myers, the Pratts, are in Melbourne, not Sydney. All of our major NGOs, Australian Red Cross, World Vision Australia, Save the Children Australia, Oxfam Australia, are in Melbourne, not Canberra. And then the global corporate social responsibility, not just the local, but the global corporate social responsibility of BHP, Rio, ANZ, NAB, Optus, Telstra, SKM, and others is in Melbourne. We are ideally placed as a home of this convergence point knowledge to be able to lead the world in moving forward. And this is why Melbourne has been selected to be the new global point for PSI, which is not pounds per square inch, it's principles for social investment. What's that? The United Nations Global Compact, created in March this year, a new secretariat, Principles for Social Investment, to coordinate global community investment programming and share knowledge between companies in making their CSR more effective. And it's going to be in Melbourne. We're going to build it through 2011, and we're going to make Melbourne the private sector version of Geneva, because we want to take that big idea, development aid to development investment, and we want to make that idea ours. We don't want to double the amount of foreign aid. We want to double the effectiveness of development aid and investment. It's too easy for us to just say, throw more money at the problem, when the mechanism that spends that money inherently fails. We need to revolutionize the mechanism. And it's an exciting time to be here. We, you, particularly those who are in your 20s, and boy, would I love to be in my 20s now. I'd be a small hole shorter on my belt, but let's not go there. Because if I was starting my working career today, I wouldn't be going off to work for UN agencies and NGOs as I have. I'd be finding the companies with the great sustainable programs, those that believe in community investment, and I would know that I could do good for the world and get a good return and get a good salary at the same time. It is a time of one of those hard to believe win-win-wins. We're at a new wave. It's a great time to be alive. It's a great time to be here. And I'm going to finish off by saying this. I want you to now think about changing the paradigm, your role. And we have to start by rehabilitating in the minds of the general population that the private sector, if well focused, if with the right guidelines, with their $59 billion a year and growing, are far more better placed to bring the world out of poverty than the organisations we've relied on before. Think in your minds and spread the knowledge, the big idea. Let's shift from development aid to development investment. Thank you.